welcome back. We're actually sitting down with the expert today.
The legendary.
The legendary, yeah. This is Greg Cahill, banjo aficionado. Actually, I love Greg. We've had a lot of fun. We pick on him all the time, but we have a lot of fun.
We can only do that because we like him so much, and he likes us back, I think.
And Greg's been doing this for quite a bit of time. Greg is like the founder of Chicago Bluegrass. I believe you started Chicago Bluegrass.
Well, there were players before me. There were good players. The Greater Chicago Bluegrass Band, but we were the ones the first touring band out of Chicago. I would say that for sure.
And also, teaching has been a very large part of your banjo history, correct?
It has, and I as many birthdays as I have that aren't real, I get a little nervous when I realize the ones that are real, because I've been teaching at the Old Town School for 52 years.
Is that true?
It is.
Are you still teaching down there?
I am. I teach there 2 Mondays a month, and it's just private lessons I teach. I have about a dozen or 15 students, something like that.
That is awesome.
But
Well, we thought this would be a great opportunity being at IBMA and getting to sit down with a lot of the musicians that are really known in this music for being creative, being one of the driving forces of the music. You playing banjo as proficiently as you do, but also as long as you've been doing it in as many different configurations. We thought you'd be a great person to sit down with, talk about what your technique is when you practice the banjo, and then you can maybe give advice to people that are both starting out playing the instrument or have been playing for a while but maybe have hit a plateau and just need some motivation, some advice on how to kind of take it to that next level.
okay.
And we need that all in the next 2 minutes.
Right.
Can you boil that down?
Boil it down.
No, so let's talk about some of the, I guess, start with instruments themselves. What do you think when let's start with a beginner, wanting to get into banjo, what do you recommend that they make sure that they purchase or
look for in
a banjo to make sure to have the most success?
I think the main thing is tune it up and see if it stays in tune. That's a huge thing.
Sure.
Because sometimes if you get the less expensive model of whatever, maybe the tuners aren't that great, and you wouldn't know that if you're just starting out. So you try to get it in tune. I think a good thing to look for also is the action. So I don't know if you can see this, but like the action doesn't have to be, your strings don't have to be a 1/4 inch off the fingerboard, They can be a little close, but then on the other hand, you don't want them too close because then you get the buzzes. So you can just look, and I don't know, I would say it's probably about 1/8 of an inch, maybe not even that much above the fingerboard here at the heel. And that's what you look for. And so if the action is good, if it feels comfortable, you put your fingers on the fingerboard in the chord position, which we'll talk about. It's not difficult. It doesn't hurt. And then when you play it, just make sure that every string kind of sounds the same volume, when you're playing it. That's another key, sometimes if one string's a little off or something, the neck could be a little warped, or, you guys know all about that. But
I think this is a good question. What was your first banjo? When you discovered the banjo, what did you start with?
Here we go again. I'm an old guy. So I ordered a Sears Silvertone banjo from the Sears catalog. And I played that for probably 4 or 5 years. And,
when was that? How old were you?
1880. No, that would have been probably in 1968.
Okay.
I didn't play it much. That was no, it was before that. It was probably 1964, right after high school. And a guy came to our high school picnic and played the banjo. And back then, it was all folk music. It was the Kingston Trio and Peter, Paul, and Mary and all that stuff, the Limelighters, and I just thought the banjo was the coolest thing. Dave Guard was my hero, the banjo player for Kingston Trio. And so that was a long neck banjo.
Did you start with a long neck? Were you starting with the three-finger
Sears
style?
thing was just a regular 5-string, regular standard stock thing. But I bought a long neck, and it was actually a Vega because Dave Guard had that, and then I got into Pete Seeger.
Yep.
And then I bought a 6-string guitar and then a 12-string guitar. I was way into Pete Seeger. And then one day, and I was doing, did he ever return? And then I heard Earl Scruggs and said, man, how many people are playing that banjo? How's they doing that?
It looks like just one guy.
Yeah, what the? and so that did it. Then I had that long. I was in a folk trio for quite a few years up in Minnesota, and we'd play at Shakey's Pizza Parlors. You probably did you have those?
We had a Shakey's Pizza out in Colorado, believe it or not.
Did you
When
really?
I was a kid, yeah.
Wow. Well, so I'm not that
What
old.
shaky, shaking?
Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
I think that's a cool point that, you actually did just by purchasing from a catalog, but it doesn't have to be a real expensive instrument. Obviously, there's some advantages for that, but just something that gets you started, something that gets you playing, and then you'll start to notice some of those nuances that you were talking about earlier as you get familiar with the instrument.
That's right. And you have to remember that bridge placement has something to do with it
yeah.
too, because then if you feel like you can't get it in tune, maybe I would then check with somebody who really does know about the instrument and know how to play, just to show you about bridge
That's an important
placement.
thing with the banjo is it does have a floating bridge. It does have
Which
a
just
lot
means
of
that the only thing
variables.
holding the bridge down is the string tension, like it's not attached.
So
it can move easily forward or backwards, which
Right.
makes the banjo in or out of tune.
Obviously, as us, the acoustic shop, we always recommend a store that's well suited and ready to go. But even if you didn't, bring it to somebody who does.
Right,
Because
that's-
I would say banjo, of all of the instruments, mandolin, I guess, sort of falls in this
Banjo's
category
most
too.
susceptible to movement.
There's so many different moving parts in a banjo that probably ought to be looked at by somebody who's qualified to be able to make sure it's
Right,
set up. It's
right.
easy to have even a good quality instrument that's poorly set up, much easier on a banjo as well as mandolin, I would say.
That's right, and if you can sit there with that person and just have them explain what we're talking about and show you, on your instrument what's up, that's great. And that saves you a lot of time and energy, because sometimes you just feel like the banjo's going to go in the garbage can because you can't get it in tune, and it could be the bridge placement, it could be a bad tuner, it could be, so just I always recommend that, yeah. Go to somebody who knows, or another player in the neighborhood or whatever,
So let's talk when you discovered Earl Scruggs, the sound, you decided, I want to learn how to do that. What was that next step? Did you get a teacher, or did you stop and listen to albums and slow them down?
I was actually going to ask even slightly before that. I assume, and again, you said you got into Pete Seeger, so does that mean you got into the book, the Pete Seeger banjo book? Is that your?
Of course.
I
I had
it
the
seemed
red
like
one.
Everybody had.
There was a red one and a green one.
And a green one,
The
yes,
red
I've
one,
seen
I
both
had the
of
red
those.
one. How to play the 5-string banjo.
And that covered 3 different techniques, right? It was sort of a 3-finger style. It wasn't really truly Scruggs style,
Right.
but it was a 3-finger style.
Right.
And then he had some frailing.
He had the frailing, right.
And a little bit of, was it drop thumb or?
Yes, yeah, it was something like that.
Yeah.
But and I did, some of that.
So you were doing a book
but-
to get you started mainly?
Yeah, the book, and now it's like centuries later in terms of the materials available. But
Sure.
yeah, that was it. And literally, you've heard it 100 times, slowing down the records. The album, slow it down to 33 1/3. And the problem is you had to retune it then.
Yeah.
So I'd play it over and over and wear the grooves out and finally say, I think I got it. But then you would turn it up back to the right speed, and then you had to retune just that little bit, and you'd play it and say, I'm missing those 2 notes. And then you'd have to slow it down again and retune it,
Sure.
But it paid off because you were learning by ear. It was ingrained in you then when you learned it. And the Pete Seeger book kind of gave you an idea about what we call tablature now, but then it got much more sophisticated, obviously.
So then you discover Scruggs. Did you then move to the Earl Scruggs book? Because that's another like banjo Bible kind of.
It is, but I didn't even know about that for a long time, in Chicago. Although Chicago was a huge folk town.
Yeah.
In Chicago, because of the Old Town School of Folk Music, we had all the first generation bands. Bill Monroe would come through pretty much every year. The Osborne brothers, Jim and Jesse. Everybody, and it was great. So we'd go see them, and they have the University of Chicago Folk Festival. It's always at the end of January, early February, and so that's how we met. The first configuration of Special C, we'd go there and watch Ola Bell Reed. It was the real deal, you couldn't be a slick band and get in there. Although they did have, I think they had Flatt and Scruggs once, and the Stanley Brothers once, but usually it was the Pinnacle Boys. It was Ola Bell Reed. It was, Wade Maynor.
Yeah.
And so we'd listen to them, and then when they were doing the changeover, it was 15 or 20 minutes. We'd all run out to the hall and play a few bluegrass tunes, and that's how we all met and formed the band eventually there.
Very, very cool. So you moved on. You started to play 3-finger style.
What was your practice routine like at that point? Like, were you just ate up with it and the banjo never made it in the case, or were there certain days where you couldn't put it down, other days you kind of skipped? Like, what should people kind of gauge themselves on? Because I know I get asked that question all the time: is how many times or how often should I practice? How long should I practice?
Right. That's a great question because it's different for everybody. I think I was eaten up with it. I couldn't. That's all I could think about. I mean, the classic doing rolls on my knee when I was either in. Well, I wasn't really. By the time I was through college, I went into the Army for a couple of years, so I didn't play. I didn't do anything for those 2 years, and then I was in graduate school and had a job, and my job was like writing grant proposals and working with kids, trying to keep kids off drugs, really, in Chicago, and so I didn't have a lot of time. But I'd be in these meetings, and I'm thinking, God, did he go thumb index finger? Did he start that with his index? I mean, literally, it was making me nuts, And eventually, that's why I quit
by the
my
way,
day job.
somehow crept into the grant proposals in the middle of it. It's
Right,
some little
I like to propose a thumb, index.
M middle.
I knew it was over for me with holding down that job, and I was married and had a son, and I had to go to Washington with these people, and we're making our pitch. We got the biggest grant money ever at that point for that kind of program, and we're in the meetings, and honest to God, the most intense moment for me was when I figured out he did hit the thumb first. That's all I could think about. But going into practicing, I mean, I think you get as much time as you can. It just depends on, some people are just eaten up. You guys were too. We all were,
Sure.
And you don't have to end up being a professional musician if you love playing and you like it, then. I think it's good to pick up the banjo. I used to think, people would say, leave the banjo out. Don't put it in the case, just have it on a stand. And then, if you get a few minutes, pick it up. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous because you pick up the banjo and by the time you just do a few rolls and you start going, then, it'll take you, but you haven't even warmed up, and then you put it down. But then I started thinking, that's not true because sometimes you might be on hold on a phone call or you might, have 5 minutes that, you have to do something in 10 minutes and you pick it up and you could maybe realize, oh yeah, you do start that one with the thumb, those are the kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I think some people say, you got to practice an hour a day. Some people say 15 minutes. I think just do what you can. You'll know. You'll figure it out as you pick up the banjo and as you progress. You want to play a little bit more. You may not have the time, but so then next time I'm going to make sure I block out a half hour instead of 20 minutes. And if you can play every day, that's great. Just have it in your hands. I think that's great. But
Well, I think again, I putting my opinion out there to tell me if you disagree with this, but I'm pretty sure Jeremy's in the same boat, which is you got to know what your goal is to play music. There's nothing wrong with the fact, like what you said, if you can get a half hour 2 or 3 times a week, but you can't expect to all of a sudden play like the best professional out there. And that's not necessarily the goal of everybody who picks up a banjo. Right. Some of us may want to just get one and we just want to be able to play 6 or 8 tunes in the next 5 years.
That's right.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's still extremely beneficial for you as a person. Music does things to all of us that nothing else can do. And being able to play it and create it is a whole nother level of that excitement. So I guess, the goal comes down to letting yourself know, what is it I want to do with this? If you want to just become okay at this and be able to play some tunes for some friends, that's one thing. If you want to sit there and go to the professional level, it's going to be like what we talked about with the three of us, where we're putting in all the time we possibly can. Any moment that we had free, we were putting it in there trying to figure out how to be better.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And as you start figuring out or learning tunes, however, I really suggest you get the tune in your ears. Tablature is a great thing, but get the tune in your ears too, or the song, So you can learn that way, and sometimes that determines how much time you're going to spend today, you know.
Yeah.
And you can break tunes down into, you know, I always say break it down into, you know, measures, you know. Okay, I'm going to get this kick off right, and that's 2 measures, and then I'm going to get the C lick right, that's 2 measures, and you just start putting the pieces together. But to your point, J.D. Crowe was like my mentor. He didn't know it for about 15 years, but I was always the nerdy guy. You'd get off stage at the festival, and I'm down there, J.D., you didn't play the D lick in Bluegrass Cabin Home like you did on the record. How did you do that? And he'd be, oh, God, give me the banjo. You know, he was great. He would always say, okay, and he would show me. But point being, I heard him talking to some younger than me, the guy, and the guy was like, God, I practice and practice. I've got the tab, and I just can't make it sound like you. And he said, you know, don't worry about that. Don't even try to sound like me, because you know what? This is what I do. And you're never going to sound like me, ever, ever, ever. So stop beating yourself up. Just enjoy playing the banjo, and you're going to sound like you. You know, my hands are different. They're bigger. My fingers might be longer or shorter or blah, blah, blah. And he went through the whole, it was so good because it made sense. You know, it was like he said, just play the banjo and do the best you can, and you'll know when you're getting it right. Don't, and then my interjection would be, don't settle for, you know, just slipping, sneaking through it, or you get to that one measure that's difficult. Don't go, oh, whew, well, I got through it. No, why don't you just slow it down and really learn how to play that one measure, you know. And if you do that, and you get eventually you do have your own sound, you know. We all think that, you know, JD or Scruggs or Bela or whatever, you're probably never going to really sound, Noam doesn't sound exactly like Bela, you know, and he doesn't want to, but
definitely got some inspiration from him, but just trying to do it his
but
own
you know,
way.
but some people may just feel so bad if they don't sound like that guy on the record or that woman, and it's don't do that, because you know you could be the most phenomenal player and you're still not going to sound like that person, because it doesn't work that way.
Sure.
I think you mentioned a couple different times that kind of maybe slipped through there with some of the people just starting out without noticing it, but breaking down a difficult solo you want to learn into small pieces. Like instead of, I've had students that just want to learn the whole chunk, like from start to finish, and every time, even if there's all these mistakes in between, they just start at the beginning and go all the way through the end of it. And what you said is basically the way I've found that it seems to be the most effective. Break it down into one measure, do that measure over and over till you perfect it, then make it 2 measures, and then move on to the second 2 measures, and then I'll put those chunks together.
Exactly.
Instead of trying to learn the entire thing at once, I think that's great advice. Just take it into small nuggets, perfect those, and then put all those pieces together.
And because it just takes forever to learn a song if you just play the whole thing through and say, I missed those 2 measures, so I'll play the whole thing through, and then and just work on that. The other thing it's very helpful for eventually is when you improvise, right? So if I'm learning my 2 measures of G, and then my 2 measures of C, I also need to learn how to tune. But I changed my strings.
It's a never-ending.
Oh my God. But you know, if you learn in those segments like that, you start seeing that these are all patterns. You know, when you talk about the G to C to D or whatever, and you've got the 2 measures, and eventually that's going to help you way down the road when you're playing well, because when we improvise, people are like, oh my God, where do you start with improvising? Well, you start by just changing that C lick. And you know it's 2 measures. So you learn a different 2-measure C lick that you heard in Your Love Is Like a Flower and say, I bet you I could put that in Bluegrass Cabin Home. And then, so you're learning in compartments all the time, right? So you're learning by licks, and you're learning by how much space does that lick fill, and then how to improvise and put it in other songs. And it really gives you a roadmap and makes it much less complicated. You know, you still have to put in the work, but I think if you have a plan like that, like what we're talking about, you know, just work on those 2 measures of G until you really have them, and then the 2 measures of C, and then play the G's and the C's, and then you go to the D's and work on those 2 measures, and then when you have that, do all 3 of them. And then what you also start realizing is, many times, especially with some of the fiddle tunes, once you learn the A part, you've probably got half the B part.
Yeah.
Because it's the
Shares
same.
it, yeah.
You know, they just change a few things for the B part, and so anyway, this is just stuff that took. It sounds so basic and logical, and obvious, but it's not.
Yeah, I think sometimes we've been doing it long enough that now it seems obvious, but then you remember that we all
Yeah,
were
that
the
you
same
sat
way.
there playing through
all
the
seems
whole
so
thing
foreign, yeah.
14 times and still missed that same one measure, and it never occurred
Or
to you.
not recognizing that it just repeated a pattern
Yeah.
that you could have.
Yeah.
So here's a question I have that I get a lot of people asking about all the time. You taught a lot of different people. What should they expect as far as how long is it going to take them to learn how to play the banjo? And this is really, I know, a very silly question, and in your head you're sitting there doing this.
No, it's not
but
silly.
It's funny how people will ask this question all the time. How long is it going to take me to learn to play the banjo?
Well, I think, like if somebody comes to me, I don't really work with people who've never picked up a banjo much, but I do. So usually the first lesson or two is just tuning the banjo, holding the banjo, hand positions, right hand, left hand, making chord positions. And then start with the roll patterns, right? Just some basic roll patterns so you get your right hand moving. And then maybe the next time, what are some of the chords you might use? And just get the left hand in with the rolls, and then just making up patterns. We've got tons of tablature with loads of stuff, but just make it more finite. Here, get these 3 rolls down for next time, and know your F position, your D position, and your bar for next time. And then you start maybe, as maybe that takes you 2 weeks, maybe a month. And then we start learning a tune, probably Cripple Creek. And then you start paying attention to the left hand techniques, right? So we've got slides. And the thing with the slide is that's 2 notes. So you can always tell people when they sneak through it. That's what I call it. And then you try to play fast, and the faster you play, the worse it sounds.
Yeah.
So I recommend, if you're not getting it, those are 2 notes. Or hammer it so that you hear 2 notes,
Yeah.
right? And the same with the pull-off. It's get the pull-off and the hammer on. So that's the next thing.
Yeah.
We start adding slides, pull-offs, hammer-ons. You've got your roll patterns, and we've got the licks. The licks then, after the roll pattern, a lick. After the roll pattern, I'll never change strings again. The lick is simply adding left-hand techniques, right? So here's a roll. That's the lick, I'm sorry. The roll. Slide, hammer. I changed it a little bit, a different pattern, but you add that, and then you start working on tunes and putting those pieces together. And it's all, once you get the techniques, but I think if you practice like that and take the time, everybody, and I was just like that. I just wanted to play, and I didn't have the patience. And I played for several years, and just would try to play fast, and even was had a band, and I'd play so hard with medium gauge strings. I was breaking strings all the time, and then I talked to Crow, and he showed me a good right hand position and said, you don't have to play hard, just be accurate. It's the tone that's coming through, and that's how it was. If you stood near Crow,
Yeah.
playing acoustically, it wasn't. You listen to Bluegrass Holiday, where it sounds like he's ripping the strings, just tearing the strings off. But really, when you're staying next to him, it was just he was playing. He had such perfect technique that the tone was overwhelmingly perfect.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you don't have to play hard. You shouldn't play hard, really. That was a long-winded
No,
explanation.
and it
So
gets to
you're
that.
saying basically that obviously how long does it take to learn to play the banjo? It depends on your definition of learn to play the banjo, because you're always learning something new. But being proficient enough that you can actually start making what sounds like music, probably a couple months of really good practice, you can have some rolls that start to sound musical.
Oh, I would say in a couple months you can probably play a couple tunes.
Yeah.
Even going through this, but
If you're putting the time.
right. And if you do it just kind of take your
In the right
time.
order.
Take your time. Yeah. Don't jump ahead and start playing. ground speed, you know, at 180 beats a minute when you just learned how to make a D position, you know.
Sure.
You know, just take your time and work your way into it. But if you really do it that way, you can, you know, do a good job in a couple months and play a tune or two, you know.
So moving a little more personal now that you've been playing for as many hours as you played the banjo, what does your practice look like now? Is it more when you're learning a new song, you put in more time, or is it still an everyday part of your life, or is it,
Well,
when you're home off of the trip, you just put it down for a little while? And
well, a lot of times I do for a day or two just because I'm also trying to do, you know, we have a booking agent, but I got to figure out how to get us there from 4 different states, you know, and all that kind of stuff. No, you know, I think you know, because I'll know songs that I play that we recorded. I'll play them on stage, and there's always that one D-lick that, doggone, I just always forget, or I play it backwards or something, and not even necessarily mistakes, just, or you get new ideas.
yeah.
So that's a big part of my practice, is just how I play through that song. I might have played it 50 times already, but I heard something different. I heard the mandolin do something different, and I would fire back on stage. You know, I play a lot off the top of my head just because I just love to play. Not that I'm not trying to make play the solo the way I learned it, but I think I make the most mistakes when I'm trying to play exactly the solo that I learned, and then when I have a little burr, I'm thinking, oh no, now I gotta, you know, you want to go back and fix it. You can't do that, and you can't, you know, so you just have to get used to the flow, and that's the kind of stuff I work on. Songs that I play that I feel like I could play better, or I would like to play better, or get different ideas or different techniques. You know, we listened to Red Allen a lot with Michael Pruitt, our mandolin player in the Sprinter, and when he passed away, God, Michael was on this Red Allen kick, and now you'll see him doing all those tremolos all the time because that was his thing then, you know, and for me it was learning that chromatic style, you know.
Yep.
Courtney Johnson. So you get on these different kicks, and then it's learning tunes too. You know, I'll hear a tune I really like, and encourage people to go to jam sessions, even if you're just starting out. Sit in the back and just watch how people are making chord changes. Watch the hands of people who are playing the instrument you're trying to play, and how they do it. You know, you don't always have to put down every finger in those chord positions, right? And on the right hand, you can just keep that roll going and have the slides and hammer-ons and make up a reasonable solo. On the spot that you know, I listen for the melody going up and the melody going down, and then I can just go up or down with what I'm playing, and it might not be the exact melody, but you get the sense of the song is what I'm saying. So all of those things, I think, are things to think about, and when you're learning new tunes, you know, I try to learn tunes in different keys as you progress. I mean, learn them in different keys and finger positions and all that, and I mean, it's infinity. Yeah.
So you're saying you're still practicing on a regular basis. It's not just, I'm just trying to keep myself happening. It's like there's always another hill to climb.
We just heard Del McCoury at a festival. I think it was Thomas Point Beach. We played a couple weeks ago, and he was talking. And he said, yeah, well, after a while, you know, I was playing and I'd be forgetting words, you know, and I'd have to rely on Ronnie to cover me, and I'd forget this and that. And you know, the funny thing is, I thought, you know, I better practice. So I started practicing. And everything's great. I can remember the words, and I can play the songs, and I don't miss the chord.
That's awesome.
You can go
He
away.
said, and he's 85, and I still have to practice.
Yeah.
You know?
I like it.
So it was good.
That was good. So I'd like to ask you, in all the students you've taught, have you seen, like, let's go to maybe the 3 biggest mistakes you see beginners make that maybe you can help people avoid?
Okay. Let's say one is just trying to play too fast too soon, because you get sloppy, and then you get used to being sloppy.
That's
And
hard to
figure,
fix.
oh, that's okay, I'll get by. And you're kind of, I call it sneaking through the measure, you know, and pretty soon you're sneaking through the whole tune. And you got to be, if you really want to play and really almost sound like the record, or really participate in a really good jam session and really play, I mean, you have to play slow. If you can't play it slow, you're never going to play it right fast, ever, ever, ever. You'll mess up.
Yeah.
The other thing is hand positions. And I teach a class at some of the camps called It's All in the Wrist. And that's because on the right hand, and I learned this from Crow, like the sweet spot is maybe an inch in front of the bridge, and if you with the picks, you want to hit right in the middle of the pick. So if you're practicing and you notice you're wearing on the edge, here's the difference. If I hit it on the edge, that's good. But watch when I turn it a billionth of an inch to hit the string in the middle of the pick. Hear how clear that is? The difference in the clarity. It's huge. So you put your middle finger so that you can rub it on the string. You don't have to hit the string all the way down by the hole in the pick. Just the tip, and just feel that go across the string in a second. The thumb was hard for me because when you drop something, you go to grab it, and your thumb moves in. But then you're going to be hitting on the inside of the pick, so you got to have that thumb just as straight. It's almost like your mental image is it's a 90-degree angle, the pick to the string. Okay. And then, the age-old thing about your anchor 2 fingers or 1 finger and don't touch the bridge. Well, Alison Brown, she's so great, she anchors 1 finger. Sammy Sheeler leans his ring finger against the bridge, So, but in general, if you're sort of in front of the bridge, and then I anchor 2, sometimes one comes up or the other, but just have a steady, solid hand position, and with your wrist, that's how you get, if you're down like this, your tendons are pulled, your thumb's going to get caught, the thumb pick right underneath like that, and you're going to play real hard, and it just won't get the right tone. You really won't. I suggest just moving your hands so you're relaxed, and you just do that a bunch, where you're watching your fingers and you're hitting right in the middle of the pick, and then you start with your roll patterns, and then you get a metronome and do the roll patterns with the metronome, and eventually, as we said, you start adding left-hand slides and hammer-downs and pull-offs and all that, and then just gradually increase. If you bump up a metronome 2 notches, once you can play it right a lot at 1 speed, 2 notches at a time, you hardly notice it, but by the time you've knocked it up 2 notches 3 times, you're playing a lot faster, and you don't even realize it. I think that's the way to get your speed instead of just
Jumping right in.
And the left hand, same thing. Keep your thumb. It's probably with all instruments. When you grab
palm
like
it all
that,
the way.
you palm it.
Yeah.
You're never going to be able to move fast enough, and if you have that little arch in the wrist. So again, it's almost like your mental image is your fingers are coming down at a 90-degree angle. They're really not, and you have to make the chord position. That takes a long time.
Yeah.
It seems so simple, but it's not, because you usually you get that.
1 finger's laying on another one.
Right, and it just has to touch it a little bit, and it's not clean. So you want to be able to do that, and then just a little tidbit: when you make the F position, think diagonal. Your ring finger, your middle, your index. There's a diagonal going that way, and when you make the D position, there's a diagonal going that way. So that's a good way to remember the D position and the F position. People call this the G position, but it's really the F position.
2 frets higher.
And if you make a C, a D, and you move it down 2, it's C. Really, they call it the C position because we make it more comfortable. But there are only 3 main positions: F, D, and bar, really. Okay.
Greg, I think this has been really good advice for people both beginning out at their adventure with the banjo and the ones that have been playing for a little while. I guess one last question I was going to ask you is, have you found yourself hitting plateaus throughout your musical journey and found ways to kind of break through those?
God, that is a really good question.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I asked it.
I don't know how to answer it. No. Yeah, a lot. And it's very discouraging when you feel like you hit a plateau, I think. And so the way I get out of that is I go listen to different people play. I'm always at the festivals watching, different banjo players, but listening to recordings, listening to what's up on the podcasts or Sirius or whatever, just to listen. And then if I still haven't had a new inspiration, I just I try to learn new tunes in different keys, or I try to play a tune that I know in D in E without a capo, or I just then make up something. What could I do here? How can I play an E comfortably at a speed without a capo? Or capo 2 and play in D, or how would I play an A without a capo? How would that sound? Or B flat? Or I just create challenges then.
So you kind of find a way to break yourself out of
To
that.
make myself get back on track with really learning something new. Because you can feel like, okay, I just keep practicing the same thing over and over, maybe in different songs and tunes, but I need to really, I just need to get something different. And so oftentimes it's just that. It's just, so learn a new tune that you haven't heard or played before. And,
New idea.
And
Good
just
deal.
get some new ideas, yeah.
That's awesome.
We said it in stereo. Need to hear.
We
Awesome
both
in
thought it was
stereo.
very awesome. Well, Greg, thank you so much for
Yeah,
taking some
Greg.
time to give us some advice and give the folks at home some tips and tricks on playing the banjo. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm so appreciative. That was great of you guys to pay me $500 to come
Yeah,
and do this just for a few minutes. So
Yeah.
thanks.
I think I got the place I'm supposed to mail that.
Yeah.
You should check that place.
Keep standing by your mailbox, Greg. It'll be there. I promise.
You might have that banjo there just in case you had that 10 minutes, the strum on it.
Time to
You
put
might
it
have some
on.
extra
Greg.
time.
Yeah, I just practiced that roll.
Anyway.
I've been
Greg-
here 13 years.
It's coming.
Yeah.
Again, thank you so much for being here, and
Thanks for having me, really. It's
We're
always,
good. We'll bring you back. We'll talk about some more stuff.
We'll get you on the
Okay.
podcast. That'll be story time with Greg.
well, kids, back in my day.
Sit on down and talk.